Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to start a set of positional reviews now for the 2020 season. We're starting off tonight with the wide receiver reviews. Is something that obviously gets a lot of talk out there on Twitter. Joining me for this, Jake Vogel. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Ken. How about you?
No complaints here. We'll talk about it. We'll probably have some complaints about the wide receivers I'm getting, but where can people find your work?
You can find most of my stuff on Twitter at RealJakeVogel. It's pretty easy to find me. I'm on there pretty often.
Okay. You write anywhere at all, or this is just you're pretty much a Twitter contributor?
Pretty much Twitter, and I have a little bit of a podcast thing going on right now, but it's just getting off, so I won't mention that right now.
Okay, fair enough. So let's start talking about the wide receivers. A very young wide receiver group to start 2020. Obviously, they seem to shed some age every year, but for the wide receivers for about 5 years in there, they were getting a new guy on the free agent treadmill year after year, and it seemed like this was a year where the Ravens avoided it until a little bit later in the season, but we'll get to him a little later. Start wherever you want, whatever receiver you'd like, and we'll talk through.
So I guess I'll start with the top guy, and that's Marquis Brown. This year, there were some big expectations for him. He posted all of those videos in the offseason, and it looked like he was bulking up and getting strong and just practicing a lot on his own, hopefully for a good season. But it didn't really turn out the way that I expected, and I'm sure a lot of other Ravens fans expected.
Yeah, it didn't quite go as far, but you're right. Those off-season videos were something we really saw a lot of, weren't they? And him on the jugs gun, making those one-handed catches, a lot of the power. I mean, as much as he seemed like a ball of muscle during the off-season, I can't say that we really saw that translate to a lot of yak during the year.
I would 100% agree with you. It didn't seem like it changed his game much. He was still very much adverse to any contact. He knows when to get down when there's a bigger guy coming at him.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it wasn't just about the yards after contact, but his yards after contact, just to give you a notion, let me see if I have that here. I will find it. I do not have it right at this moment. Yes, I do. His yak went up from 226 to 274, but his catches went up also by 30%. So you'd expect it to go up even by a little bit more. So the guy we remember in 2019 is pretty much going down as soon as he caught the ball. Anytime, certainly caught it before the third level. Really didn't improve his yak numbers at all. What did get worse was his drops. He went from 2 to 6 in terms of drops. That's a pretty big problem for him.
Yeah, 100%. And he had that infamous tweet that everyone knows about, so we don't really need to harp on it too much. But the drops were very disappointing. He seemed to pick things up near the back end of the season. About the last 5-6 games, he really started playing well, and that carried him into the playoffs.
Definitely a glimmer of hope. I think the key numbers, as I would look at it from 2019, 7 touchdowns, 0 interceptions on balls thrown to him. In 2020, a much more mediocre 8 and 4. Not what you want. And the passer rating throwing to him was 123.2 in 2019, only 92.5 in 2020. So he was a contributor to the reduction in Jackson's quarterback rating. And obviously some of that is Jackson, but some of it is him as well.
Absolutely. That's always tough. Yeah. Andy Dalton, of course, used to throw it to AJ Green so often that you would see a similar thing even with a much better receiver on paper.
All right. So good. Yep. If we're good with Brown, let's move on.
Yeah, absolutely. So next guy on the list is Willie Snead. I didn't expect him to have a huge year in 2020, and he didn't have that great of a year. However, his yards per reception were solid. They were much better than the guy we're going to talk about a little bit later, Dez Bryant. 13.1 yards per catch this year. He just hasn't been that involved in the offense. He was the third leading receiver on the team with 432 yards, but that tells you how Baltimore's offense ran this year in the passing game.
Yeah, I think it was his best year as a Raven. I mean, he started off, caught the first 10 balls thrown to him. Then it wasn't as good the rest of the way. He only caught 23 of 38 the rest of the way. It's only about 60%. But the 10 out of 10 to start the year buoyed his number up to almost 69% for the year, which is decent for a wide receiver. You mentioned the yards per reception. I like to look at yards per target. 9.0
Sure.
yards per target, excellent. And the second best number of his career, he's at 9.7 in 2015. So a good year from that perspective. So lots of things to point to and like about that. Certainly a go-to guy on third down. Almost plays a little bit like a tight end on the field, a guy they motion into the middle of that backfield, and a guy who is out there open between 10 and 15 yards.
Absolutely. He's also been a guy since 2018 that has a couple spectacular catches in a season where the quarterback, when it was Joe Flacco, or now for the majority of that time being Lamar, just kind of throws up a ball, and Willie climbs the ladder and makes a beautiful catch when it doesn't seem like a person of his stature or frame would be able to do that at the level that he does.
Yeah, one of the big catches, of course, was in that Cleveland game, going up to catch the ball from McSorley for the first down. Yeah, McSorley for the first down before the triumphant 4th and 5 return of Jackson to win the ball game.
Absolutely.
It was a pretty cool catch, certainly for the year. We mentioned this for Brown, so I'm going to do it for Snead as well. But on the year, he had how many receiving touchdowns this season? Only 3 receiving touchdowns, but only 1 interception is better than that was before. He did have 3 drops, so he's in the same kind of position that Brown was in terms of percentage of drops at 6.3%, even a little bit higher. Not ideal numbers, not an ideal season. He is currently a free agent. He is part of a large middle class in the NFL of players. I think there's a chance he'll be back with the Ravens.
Yeah, I definitely see that as a possibility. His season was okay. The only hesitancy I have here is how much money does he want? How involved in the offense does he want to be? And with the development of the younger receivers that are a little bit lower on the depth chart, what does the coaching staff want to do? I would love to see Devin Duvernay get some of those targets and get more involved in the slot where Willie Snead tends to thrive.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense that Duvernay would be a guy taking snaps from Snead. I think Snead is a guy who's going to get squeezed by the COVID cap in 2021. I don't think there's some team looking out there to sign him for 3 years for $9 million, say, which would be about the top end anyway. I think in a normal year, coming off the kind of year he's had. But if he may well be a guy who ends up playing for the vet minimum or pretty close to it. And if the Ravens could sign him to a deal where they get the veteran salary benefit from him, maybe that's a real cap win for the Ravens. And they have an opportunity to really feast off the available middle class around the NFL if they play their money tight this offseason. If they go out and try and sign a wide receiver with most of that money, then they'll blow it and they won't have that money available. But my guess is they're going to play that money pretty tight.
I absolutely agree with that. Everybody make sure to go listen to the podcast that Ken had with Cole Jackson. It was great. They were talking about a similar thing with the middle class this year. And of course, all of the podcasts with Dan Reese.
Appreciate that plug, Jake. Thanks a lot for that. Also the state of the roster stuff at the end of the year with Brian McFarland, I also recommend to folks as being a guy who really understands the salary cap and what we're headed for. But a lot of middle class opportunity there for this Ravens front office, which has certainly proven to be adept at getting it. Every time you hear about it, JJ Watt's available or some great wide receivers available. It comes to the same thing: is like, who are we giving up if we do that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if we tried to sign one of those big name guys, we are really losing a ton, like you're saying, with the cap. We have a decent amount of money to sign some of those middle tier players at wide receiver, at edge. If we can re-sign 1 or 2 of our guys.
Derek Wolfe, maybe.
Derek Wolfe. Yeah. I know a lot of people on Twitter were looking to see if he was going to be signed about a week or so ago. It hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
Yeah, so there will be a lot of guys available, and I think there'll be a lot of guys in the 1 to 3 million range too. And we won't know everything until we get a more clear cap number and a more clear sense of how significant 2021 revenues are going to be impacted by COVID again. And I mean, already looks like fans in the stands will probably be lower. So I'd have to imagine, even with better TV money, that you're talking about lower revenues. And no matter what, the owners are going to share those on a pro rata basis with the players. That's similar. So it just becomes a matter of how much do you borrow from the future? How much do you levelize? And the Ravens will be smart to play that as tight as possible to give themselves the most future cap room.
I absolutely agree with all of that. Would you like to move on to the next receiver?
Absolutely.
So next we have Miles Boykin. He is going into year 3 just like Marquis Brown. This year was a little bit disappointing for Boykin. However, his touchdown numbers are still pretty good. He had 4 touchdowns this year. Not a huge mark, but we also have experienced Torrey Smith in Baltimore the year that he went for over 1,000 yards, but only had a couple touchdowns. So Boykin, not a spectacular season. His targets barely increased from last year. I think he was in the 20 range, maybe 25, 26.
Up to 33.
Yeah.
From 22 to 33. Yeah.
22 to 33, 11 more.
Not what we were looking for.
No, not at all. I mean, he's one of those guys that's a training camp hero in Baltimore. And this year with COVID and the lack of a preseason, it really hurt all of the wide receivers, especially a young guy in Miles Boykin.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things about Miles Boykin as a receiver, obviously, but he did take a slight step backward in terms of his per target production. His yards per target went down to 8.1 from 9, which is good in his rookie year. That was really something to build on. His catch rate went down slightly. A good thing is he did not have a drop as Pro Football Reference scored. So I think they used the Sports Radar underlying data, but they did not tag him with a drop during the year, which is nice. He did do some things positively, particularly towards the end of the season. The 43-yard touchdown pass against Cincinnati was a nice one. He had some contributions against Buffalo in a limited amount of play with 3 catches in that game. But what I really love about Miles Boykin is Miles Boykin, the run blocker, and how much he adds to this offense in that way. And play after play, he's just a guy who uses his length extremely well in level 2 and level 3 to keep people at bay, keep his feet, and not lunge like linemen. I mean, you have linemen much more capable and much more professionally, set with the duty of blocking. But once they get out of space, they can look very uncomfortable in that process.
Oh, for sure. Miles Boykin is probably the greatest run blocking wide receiver Baltimore has ever drafted. And he's up there with other guys that they've had in general. Anquan Bolden, of course, has some highlight blocks to his name. And Willie Snead has been, above average as well. But Boykin has that frame and he uses it really well blocking. I just wish he would capitalize in the receiving game using his frame a little bit more. And some of that could be due to not understanding the route tree quite well enough yet, or not connecting with Lamar on certain plays. But I see it in the run game. I don't see it as much in the passing game.
Right. So we see a couple of things with Boykin, I think, in terms of the passing. But I'm going to go with one, and then we'll do one at a time. The one it really came up on the interception against the Titans in the playoff game, that Boykin did not track that ball at an early enough time or well enough to be able to get back and prevent that interception. That really is a tracking issue. And I know in some ways he was following almost exactly the track of the football. So it made it a difficult, perceiving the ball hit directly over your head as an outfielder is the toughest catch to make. And a ball like that was more or less over his head was also somewhat difficult, or more on the same azimuth that he was going. And for him not to be able to get back and prevent that interception obviously was a bad thing, and something that he's got to do better if he wants to earn more of Lamar's trust.
Absolutely. I mean, to just some simple people watching football, it looks like he just needs to come back to the ball more in some of those plays, especially when the DB's going for it and he's just kind of standing there flat-footed. I mean, you got to always attack the ball in those situations, and if the guy catches it, you have to be there to tackle him. Kind of like what we saw in the playoff game against Buffalo, where Lamar gets picked off by the defender he didn't see, and Andrews didn't make the tackle early enough.
Mm-hmm. One thing we have seen from a guy who left the Ravens and a guy who stayed with the Ravens in Boykin is a very different basketball ability to box out the defender on a pass play. And you're kind of alluding to it in what you're saying. He needs to use his frame. He needs to get up. He needs to make the defender play through his back to prevent the interception, because that usually create a pass interference play. But I think Boykin doesn't do enough of that, and he hasn't become proficient enough at that. Whereas we saw Waller now at Oakland. My God, he's a master at it. He uses his frame so well to block out the defenders and catch the football. I have to believe that's at least partly a function of coaching, but it may be a case where Boykin needs to get really good off-season coaching to take that next step.
Absolutely. This could tie into some new coaching moves that John Harbaugh's staff just made. We added the two new receiver coaches, T. Martin and trying to remember the other name. One of the guys has worked with Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and many other big names. And the other guy, T. Martin, is the father of incoming rookie wide receiver Amari Rodgers out of Clemson. So both of these guys have tons of experience working with wide receivers, and some of them, I mean, one of them has worked with I
think it's
passing games.
Keith Williams you're talking about.
Keith Williams, yes. So I have a feeling if the players are able to be in the building a little bit more this offseason, just having those guys in-house could help develop these players. But we as fans always enjoy seeing the players attack the offseason with their own time and their own money.
Oh, absolutely. So, last year, reports were positive from Boykin to see him using a jugs gun. I think Lamar Jackson has the whole youth of the Ravens pretty mobilized in terms of what they do in their offseason because of his big jump from year one to year two. We saw Brown doing it. We saw the incredible work that Skura did to handle his rehab. We've seen a few years ago now, we saw Ryan Jensen take that huge leap between year 3 and year 4 and earn a huge contract out of it. And you gotta love that when a player can do it. But they need to definitely see more of that across the board with some of these young players.
Absolutely. All right. The next guy on the list is Devin Duvernay. He was one of my favorite players to watch. Once the Ravens drafted him, I dove into his tape at Texas, and he was really exciting. He caught a lot of screens. He looked like a bowling ball out on the perimeter. If he caught the ball and he was on the sidelines, watch out, because corners couldn't tackle him with just one arm or even two for that matter. He didn't have quite the opportunity I would have liked to see in year one in Baltimore. He was very effective on end arounds, and that's going to be the first number I'm going to bring up. He had 4 carries for 70 yards this year. That's 17. Yeah, 17 and a half yards per carry. I would have liked to see a lot more than just 4 attempts. And perhaps one of them might have been a penalty that came back, so we didn't have that statistic. But, I mean, just a really fast guy. And I feel like in the offseason, he developed a little bit more wiggle to his game. Maybe he was doing some yoga, stretching. At Texas, he looked very linear. And just kind of like a straightforward speed guy, but he had a little bit more to him in Baltimore from what I could see.
Yeah, no, he caught some shorter balls. His average depth of target was only 6.2. Of course, to think of it, we remember a lot of the screen passes and whatnot they were running early in the year in particular. And I could have believed even it was shorter than that. But he caught 20 out of 26 balls, 77%, which is excellent. And, that's a number that you kind of expect from a running back. It's that good. Very few wide receivers will ever get in that range. Buffalo had like 3 of them, unbelievably. They were up in the 76% range and above. But Allen and their receivers had a great year. And also they run a lot of wide receiver screens is the other component of that. The problem I have with Duvernay is how they stopped using him. And then who was getting those snaps and away from him. But the last 5 games of the regular season, Duvernay had 3 targets, 2 receptions for 2 yards total.
Yeah, that's just pitiful. You have to think that's game planning, and Roman likely need to put in some plays specifically for Duvernay. And
right.
You see Andy Reid and other coaches across the league able to put their playmakers in position to get the ball.
Yeah. And I agree. And he did not, by the way, have a catch in the postseason either. He took over really as a punt returner for the Ravens. And it's nice to get a 2-to-make-1 situation if you can get both your return jobs done. But that can't mean you take him out of the offense, particularly since they're replacing him with someone that I just don't respect at all.
Yeah. So to lead to that, I believe we're talking about Dez Bryant here. Dez became more involved in the offense down the stretch, and he was not very effective, as Ken's mentioning. I only have one number here, and it would be even worse if it was per target, but 7.8 yards per catch. If you see that in a wide receiver, the answer is no.
Yes. Yeah, I'd like fair enough.
Did you have the yards per target?
Yes, I have it. I need to pull it up here for just a second. 4.3 yards per target, which is basically at the Patrick Ricard level. That's what you're getting. You're getting a fullback basically with that. And I did have 2 touchdowns. And the one thing I'll say is A.J. Green also had a piece of crap year. A.J. Green didn't have as many excuses because he had only taken 1 year off with the injury. And I kind of say he'd kind of taken that year off. But anyway, he came back. He played a fair amount this year, got a lot of targets, the 5.0 yards per target. There are still people on Twitter who want the Ravens to sign A.J. Green for next year.
Yeah, I can't believe that. I'm definitely not in on the A.J. Green to Baltimore train.
Let's talk a little bit more about Bryant, because the difference that I want to point out with A.J. Green is that Bryant was actually trying. And I think I can understand why the coaches were okay having him on the field, because he was able to submerge his ego to a degree. And he got a little flared up about not being able to play against Dallas with COVID, and that really didn't sound very good. But honestly, he was a competitor. He wanted to get out there. When he was on the field, he was really trying in terms of run blocking. And if we had seen any kind of a forfeiture there, if he had not been doing his job there, I'd have been very upset about it. But at least that he was trying. And as it turned out, then I'm just upset about the snaps wasted on him.
Absolutely, he did run block pretty well. He, along with some other receivers, struggled to get footing down the stretch. We had a lot of games with poor weather, so I'm not going to put that 100% on Dez, but on many out routes, corner routes, he was just slipping in the grass and making it one less target for Lamar to throw the ball to. He didn't threaten anyone down the field. Corners, safeties were not scared of him one bit, so all of his targets were short. Pretty much they were of the shorter variety, and he had those 2 touchdowns. I just don't understand why they switched to Dez versus giving Devin Duvernay or even James Prochay some more targets.
Yeah, more chances on the outside. And, that's exactly it. Is Bryant took 129 snaps. And my first question is, if you say there's no downside to Dez Bryant, and that was a common thing to be said, is there's potential for a big upside and there's no downside. Well, yes, there is. If he's on the field taking snaps from a better player, that's downside. That's exactly what it is. And there's no way I can look at this as any way but Dez Bryant cost the Ravens fairly significantly in 2020. There's nothing about this that you can pull out of this and show me that says it's a good result.
I absolutely agree with that. So next we have James Prochay. He did not have many opportunities. He was targeted 3 times this year, and he had 1 catch for 14 yards. That catch was really nice. He he kind of baited the defender. Was it a linebacker?
Crossing route on third down for a first down, I remember. I'm trying to remember what game it came in.
He broke to the outside and he faked inside. So it was
Tennessee regular season game.
Yep. So, I mean, he looked good in that limited action. He also was involved on the interception with the Steelers game. I believe he was the target. Other than that, he couldn't find the field. Devon Duvernay is a more explosive athlete. There's no doubt about it. He has more speed, more burst, more game-breaking potential. But both of those players from this class have stellar hands. They both really know how to catch the ball and frame the ball with their hands and with proper technique at a consistent basis.
I got to go back to one of the points, because you made the point that there was an interception against Pittsburgh on a ball that was thrown to him, and that was in the home game. Griffin also threw a pick six on his third target of the season, which was in the game at Pittsburgh. So 2 out of the 3 balls thrown to him were pick sixes. So
wow.
That will end it pretty quickly. He did have, how many total? 25 offensive snaps was it for the game, and they shut him down. No, actually, he was still available weeks 12, 13, 14, 15, but then they shut him down after week 15 for the rest of the year, including the postseason. And I think it was probably the right call, given the fact that they were saving a roster spot and they needed it elsewhere, particularly on defense.
Absolutely.
What would you hope going in Prochay in 2021? I'm sorry.
Yeah, going into this next year, I'd just like to see him get more involved in the offense. If a guy like Snead is out the door, or even if he's still there, I'd like to see him get on the field, get involved with some intermediate and shorter depth targets. He can work well out of the slot. He also worked pretty well on the outside when he was at SMU. Him and Devin Duvernay and Hollywood Brown are all guys that make some good money in the slot. So Baltimore has not necessarily an embarrassment of riches, because that's
a stable of
that's not yeah, that's not true. But yeah, they definitely have a stable of slot receivers in Baltimore. So I'd just like to see him get more involved, see if he can actually lock up the punt returning job and keep it away from Duvernay, and just go from there.
Yeah, honestly, if it comes down as a week for week roster decision where Prochay has to lose his game day activation because the Ravens need an extra defender, and oftentimes, they're making really tough decisions like, should I play with 4 cornerbacks? Should I play with 4 defensive linemen? That kind of tough decision should not be made if the only guy you have to sit is James Prochay, 2020. To get the
right.
So James Prochay needs to make it more of a decision to sit him down in order for that to really come into play. Because I don't think the Ravens in most of these games are going to need 6 receivers. They might want 5 in a lot of them. One guy we didn't mention that we probably ought to is Chris Moore. I'm not even sure if he got a receiving target this year, but he did play on special teams. And a guy in 2018 who had a pretty damn good year. And all of a sudden, we really haven't seen him since on the field as a receiver.
Absolutely. Yeah, Chris Moore was a bit of an afterthought this year, even though it seems like the coaching staff still really likes him. They kept him on the team all year. They wanted him on special teams, and they activated him down the stretch. So it was an interesting one. I don't expect him back in Baltimore unless it's really just as a end of the receiving room depth chart kind of move.
Yeah, it's interesting because 2 years ago, in 2018, he had a really good year. He caught 76% of the balls thrown to him, 19 out of 25. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you want. I mean, a possession receiver like that who also contributes on special teams, that's the Ravens way. The Ravens want great special teams players, but they have to get something else out of them, because kick coverage and punt coverage duties anymore in the NFL are just not significant enough. There's just too many kicks go into the end zone, and there's a lot of the strategy of the game revolves around not pooching the ball when you have a big lead and don't want to take chances with injuries or with the score or whatever. I mean, you don't pooch anymore. Same thing with punting, and particularly with Cook, is that a high percentage of punts are not returned for a variety of reasons. So, and the Ravens don't punt as much because they go for it on fourth down, and they punt less because their offense is pretty good. So you end up with not as many kick coverage opportunities for a player like Moore, and it's not like he's valuable on other special teams elements.
Absolutely agree with all of that. It's going to be hard for him to make the team, especially with an anticipated addition of some sort to the wide receiver room, either in free agency or the draft, or a combination of the two.
Yeah, pretty good chance for a draft, I would say. But in some ways, wouldn't it be a little surprising if the Ravens didn't draft a wide receiver somewhere up and down the line? The problem is it may be Jordan Lasley or it may be Jaleel Scott again, who doesn't make a big first-year contribution.
Yes, absolutely. I'm hoping that they can get a true X receiver. It's not as important as filling the need of offensive line, but the more picks that they acquire, the more chance that the right player is sitting there with the most value, the way that they draft BPA.
I want to go back to a scheme component that you kind of hit on when you're talking about the large stable of slot ponies that the Ravens have at wide receiver. So the question is this: they've got still at that position some balance of size they can put in there, whether it's a split tight end in Andrews or even Boykin, moving inside. Boykin is more of a outside receiver naturally, but you could move him in the inside. They've got the shiftiness of Duvernay and also some of the physicality that he gives you on the inside. And you've got some of the speed of a Prochay, and Duvernay obviously has that speed as well. If Snead comes back, he provides you another veteran presence who's a very high percentage ball catcher, a good percentage ball catcher. So my question is, why would the Ravens not consider adding something to the playbook that would be more bunch formation looks on obvious passing down? So you have to throw the ball. They have obviously a like of vertical routes because they want to clear out a lot of the underneath space for Jackson to run the ball, to scramble. But you can also, just set the opponent up a little bit and once per game, twice per game, run a bunch formation where you're really trying to screw them up on the inside and see what Jackson can make of that, because a lot of those plays do, create opportunity right off the line of scrimmage.
I love that idea. I would love to see some more bunch formations, not only for the route concepts that you can include in those, but also the screen game that we really want to see evolve in Baltimore in 2021 with Devin Duvernay. I don't know if I really buy into Hollywood getting involved in that. If he's untouched, I love it. but that's the problem. Duvernay is one of those guys that can take on more contact and really blow through some of that.
Right. And I think you probably have that ability even out of 12 personnel, because you can split two tight ends wide in a bunch with one other wide receiver and get some of that wide receiver screen capability you've seen, or you can get some of that ability to break free off the line of scrimmage. And both Andrews and Duvernay would give you some of that, whereas any other big body, I mean, they did a real good job of it with Hayden Hurst a couple of years ago to get him in a position to make good blocks in level 2 and 3 in the run game primarily. But it would be interesting to see if they could develop a tight end, and I think they're going to get a new one, who would be able to do some of that in level 2 and 3 in the passing game.
Yeah, I really hope to see that addition, or maybe that guy's in-house. I am not sure yet, but I expect a move or two in the draft for a receiving threat. It does not have to be a wide receiver. It could be another tight end. I'm all about it. But just to provide that complement like Hayden Hurst was when he was in Baltimore.
Yeah, it really was a secret sauce for the Ravens to have that third tight end in a lot of plays. And 13 personnel just puts that defensive coordinator in a real pickle in terms of who he matches up, or even what personnel package he puts in to face it. All right, outstanding stuff. Loved having you on. Appreciate it, Mr. Vogel. And tell us, again, plug anything you like. Your upcoming pod is going to be starting when? You want to talk about it?
So we've had one episode. We did a mock already. You can find us at the Say It Again network. You can just find us on Twitter, and that stuff is posted and live streamed as well. And I will be doing some writing in the near future on some of my favorite draft prospects. I'm really going through about every position, focusing on the offensive line right now, and then moving to wide receiver.
Okay. All right. Very cool. We'll look forward to that. Other folks out there, I want to give you a little bit of the upcoming stuff we'll have. This is the first of 10 of these positional reviews to look back at 2020 and try and discern what the Ravens had, what they can keep in terms of going forward. We're also setting up for the offseason in terms of shorts. And I want people out there who have good thoughts about football, whatever they may be, contact me on Twitter. I'm at Filmstudy Ravens. You can also just send me an email, filmstudy21@verizon.net, and give me your thoughts on a short you would like to do. The best topics are highly focused. We can do them in 20 minutes. So we can't talk about every element of fixing the Ravens offense from offensive line to wide receiver to all this. And we can't even talk about, some more complex concepts about the passing game because they're too big for a short. But we can talk about how would you incorporate new tight ends into this offense differently than they used them before, for example. One of the recent ones is very well done, I thought, and it's the contributions of Ken Winkler, was in terms of how the Ravens could benefit from a more athletic center. So I thought that was a really good, very specific and very good topic. But appreciate you coming on, Jake. And thanks for coming. And we'll talk to you next time on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ken.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.